We're streaming here with Steve Smith, Ardalis. Feel free to follow me on Twitch or YouTube if you like. Today we're going to be following up on a stream we did last week where we were working with Azure Identity, trying to set it up to work with authentication on a web app using cookies, which we did in our last stream. And then we want to try and also use it to support API authentication. So that's what we're going to pick up with again this week. In terms of some of the show notes, I do need to mention that this stream is being sponsored by Microsoft Azure, and I am a Microsoft MVP for a few years now. In this stream, if you're going to be on the chat, please make sure you observe the virtual event code of conduct, and you can find it here at this link. Also, make sure you check out the 425show.dev website, which I'll show you in just a second. It has a bunch more resources. We can find other streamers, both Microsoft employees and others, talking about different things related to Azure and other technology that you might be interested in. So I'm going to go ahead and move that. Let's go find my browser instance. Here we go. So this is the 425 show. You can watch this intro video. I mentioned it last week as well. Different things you can learn. Some of them are interview style where you'll have multiple developers talking to each other. Sometimes it'll be just a one-on-one, like a single developer going through some things. There's end-to-end scenarios that you can check out, and then there's a list of upcoming activities like this one that's going on right this second. All right, so let me make sure I've got my chat going, which I do. Cool. All right, so last week I struggled a little bit trying to figure out how to get this quick start working on how to protect an ASP.NET API. Was it this one? I'm not sure it was this one. I mean, it was this one. But trying to get my own web API to be protected using Azure AD. And the part that threw me, setting up the API to be protected was trivial. That took no time at all. And the docs were really good for that. But what I was struggling with was how to get the token that I would need to pass along with those requests. And I couldn't figure it out in the limited time that I had at the end of the stream. And so I spent some time and I found a better sample. And so if you go out to GitHub, before we even get started here this week, and I will warn you, I haven't actually successfully gotten this all working yet. I'm still trying to come at this as you can learn with me what the challenges are with this. In fact, I'm just going to Google for this. So if you Google for GitHub Azure samples, that should take me to the right place. There we go. It is just Azure-samples. You'll find that there are a whole lot of repositories in here. There's literally 1,800 repositories in Azure samples, and there's a lot of good stuff in here that can help you get started. And some of it isn't necessarily in the docs yet. I'm sure there's tasks involved to get those things done. Hey, Christos, how's it going? But you will find a lot of valuable information here inside this Azure Samples repo that'll help you get started with whatever it is you're trying to do for Azure. So, hey, we just got rated by the 425 show. Awesome. Welcome. And Microsoft developer. Excellent. So, welcome everybody. In this scenario, what I'm looking for is... oh, I just closed the window I wanted to show you. All right. Hang on a sec. What I'm looking at is, I think it's this Active Directory ASP.NET Core Web App OpenID Connect v2 is the sample I'm using. But let me just pull up the folder and verify that. So on my machine, I have a Azure Samples folder that looks like this. And all I did was clone this one right here today in here. And I think we'll use the new Visual Studio Preview again this week for that. So have a great weekend. ASP.NET Web Dev Samples, any repo. Yeah, exactly. The repo that I'm using is, let's go open it. C:\\Azure Samples. It's this Active Directory ASP.NET Core Web App OpenID Connect v2, which is the top hit on there. And so that's what you see in it. And we'll jump here. So it's this one. And I'll throw this in the chat just to make that easy to find. Okay, so Active Directory, ASP.NET Core, Web App, OpenID Connect. It sounds like it's one sample from the repo, but it's actually a whole bunch of samples. So that's why this one is definitely worth checking out if you haven't seen it, because it's got 6 different ways to do some of these things. So there's obviously there's a lot of different scenarios that you can support when it comes to authenticating APIs, and so this is just showing you a bunch of different ways that you can do it. Why are there different scenarios? Well, you might have your own API that you want to secure, and you need to have some way for your users to authenticate, and once they've authenticated, to be able to access your API in a secure fashion, right? So that's your API that you wrote that's custom with your, database or your backend or whatever it is you're using. Another option, though, is you might want to give access to Azure APIs, and that's a different process, a different sample that you might use. So there's that option. Even when you're talking about your own API, or actually for either one, the other choice is like who can actually get to it. And so it might be that the users are being authenticated with just a Windows account or Windows identity account, and it's their personal account or it's their school account or whatever. And as long as they're authenticated somehow, they're able to get access, right? You just need to know who they are, but they don't have to be in your domain necessarily or your own service authority. So another option is that they have to be in your Active Directory instance. And so that just changes the tenant that they're going to be authenticating against. And so we'll talk to that in just a minute. And BSD guy gifted a 1-tier sub. Awesome. Appreciate it. So and thanks for the subscribe. C Matskis, I appreciate that too. Okay, so this is the repo that we're looking at. These are the samples that we have. We want to do something that has your API, right, where your is me. And so I want to have an API that I can secure and show how that works. So let's jump into the code for that. And I was in the midst of opening the project here, so we're going to look into this folder, web app your API. And then in here, like I mentioned, there's still some options. And what I was trying to do last week, and what I set up all the Azure credentials and resources for last week, was that I wanted them to be able to use my organization to authenticate to my API. So we're going to look at this one. And again, I haven't tried this before, so we're going to stumble through it together, and we'll see how easy or hard it is to do all together at the same time. So here's our solution, and we'll pop this open. Now the other thing that is in this repository is a lot of really good documentation that isn't necessarily in the docs. So I don't know why this is spinning, but it is a preview build of Visual Studio, so maybe that's the culprit. It worked fine up until now, though. Might have to kill it. Alright, let's try that again. So we'll try Visual Studio again, and we'll open project. We'll go out back to C:, Azure samples, and we go into OpenID Connect v2, your API, my organization, OpenNet solution, and I'm having trouble with that one project. All right, there it goes. Much happier the second time. Okay, so what do we got here? Well, we have a service, which is the thing we're trying to secure, and then we have a client that is trying to talk to our service. All right, so right away, compared to the sample that we looked at last week, which only had the service, it didn't have the client, this is a much nicer sample because I can see both sides of the communication. So the other thing in here is the solution items, and if we look at this README and also the incremental instructions, look at this bar here, right? Look how long this is. There is a ton of data in here for documentation for how to use all this stuff. So take advantage of that when you're looking at these repositories. Don't just look at the code. Someone has taken a lot of time and effort to put in documentation on here that tells you exactly what this is for and how it's supposed to be used. So in here we've got a scenario which is that I want to expose a web API. I want to protect it so only authenticated users can get to it. And I want to enable those authenticated users with work and school accounts to use my web API. Then my API calls Microsoft Graph or something to provide value to its client apps. Okay. So the sample represents this web API running an ASP.NET Core, protected by Azure AD OAuth, and the client application is going to obtain a JOT access token, a JWT token, using OAuth 2.0. Right, and that's the part I was having trouble with last week because my sample I was going from didn't show me how to do that. So the client web app essentially takes the following steps. It's going to sign in the user. In the process of signing in the user, it's going to go off and acquire an access token. Well, not in the process. Right after it signs in the user, it's going to go acquire an access token for the web API, and it's going to call the web API using that token as a bearer token, which we talked about last week. I'll briefly review it again today. And that's going to then let them access that server API. There's some images in here we could see as well. Probably I can get to all that in GitHub. So let me see. We'll come down here. Oh, look, there's an image. So here's some images with the thing here. They're not necessarily easy to read because there's some black text on there, but I think maybe that's because I have a dark background in GitHub and it's a PNG file. And it's transparent. I wonder how do I switch GitHub to be not dark? Dark mode? I don't know where that is. What if I take this thing and I copy the image and I go to some image editor? Oh, I know, I can just use Word. Go to Word and blank document and paste it. I have these problems sometimes with transparent PNGs on dark backgrounds. There we go. That'll do it. And now you can see the actual black text, right? So here's sign in, call the web API, restrict user access. This looks like a subway diagram or a train diagram. So you sign in the user, and remember they had multiple samples. So this is showing at a high level like all the different ways that this might work. So if they're in your org, you hit one type of flow. If they're in any org, or if they just have a work or personal account, these are all different options. We're looking at just one of them. So we're just looking at the in my org option. Then it's going to go off here and sign in the user. Call web APIs on behalf. So when you get in here, you can call out to Microsoft Graph APIs if you want, get information from there. And then you can also call your own API. That's what I want to do here. And then you can use authorization within your API to restrict what they can do using groups or roles. And then there's another deployment step down here at the bottom. All right. Let's see. Nope, that's not what I want. So let's go back here and let's see. I think there was another image that might have been useful. These are all pretty simple looking now. Okay. So now let's look at the code. So we'll come in here, and this isn't going to run just out of the box because I'm going to need to add some configuration for it. And I'm going to need some GUIDs that I used last week for the other app I was using. Which actually I'll just go ahead and open. So let me go find that folder, Azure samples, and I'll pull up last week's one that I was working on, which will be this one. We'll just open it in VS Code. Sure. Alright, so here's what we were working on last week, and we had this web API, and we had some app settings, and we had some GUIDs that we were pulling from Azure that had the client ID and the tenant ID that I needed. So I'm going to need those when I try and apply this to this new sample. And this is just a different sample that was in that same Azure samples folder. So this is the Active Directory.NET Native, ASP.NET Core v2, ASP.NET Core 3.1 sample. But notice it only has the web API. It doesn't have the client. And so I'm hoping this time with the client that things are going to go much more smoothly. All right, so let's look at the service. The service has a controller. The controller has this to-do list thing here. And so it has an in-memory to-do list that you can hit at API slash to-do list. And it's authorize only, so you have to be authenticated. And then in here, there's this in-memory dictionary of to-do items. We populate it with some sample data in the constructor if it doesn't have any. And then in here it's got get by ID, and it's going to show you the owner. So we'll know if we're authenticated because we're going to see what the owner is here, I think. because how does that work? Yeah, so the owner is being used up here when we populate the items. We're grabbing the identity name there. So if we're not authenticated, this is not going to work, obviously. You can get a particular one of them, you can delete them, you can post new ones, etc., etc. Standard CRUD operations on a to-do list. Okay. What is the model? We have a to-do item, and a to-do item just has a title and an owner with an ID. And then in program.cs, where the app starts, everything here looks standard to me. We're just going to call create host builder, run it with all the defaults, and say use startup. So then startup is where all the action is going to be here. Inside of startup, this is where you're going to configure everything to work with Microsoft Identity. So here you can see we're using Microsoft Identity Web at this point, and a whole lot of the standard things you would use inside of a startup file for an ASP.NET Core or ASP.NET 5 app. Okay, so a bunch of comments in here. This is saying required to be instantiated before OpenID connection options starts to be configured. By default, the claims mapping will map claim names in the old format to accommodate older SAML applications. For instance, role instead of roles. This flag ensures that claim identity claims collection will be built from the claims in the token. The JOT security token handler that default map inbound claims equals false. So I think this refers to this. And I'm not really sure what all this refers to at this point, honestly. But let's come on down here. We say add Microsoft Identity Platform, ADV2, to protect this API. That's what I want. And we just say here, pass in configuration. It'll figure out what it needs from configuration, I'm guessing. And we just call add Microsoft Identity Web API Authentication. This is an extension method. iService collection. Where's this thing defined? Extension. Well, let's just go to definition, see what we get. Right, so this is coming in from Microsoft Identity Web. So that namespace that you saw that we're using also is where these extension methods are coming from. Okay, and then we just add controllers. Right, so there's literally nothing else here being wired up. We're just wiring it up for Web API authentication and then add controllers. Instead of saying add MVC, we're saying add controllers here because it's just an API. So we don't need to have support for views and razor pages and what have you. And so that's what that's doing. Okay, then we call configure, and the key things that we need configure to have are going to be down here. There's going to be use authentication, use authorization. Everything else is pretty standard, it looks like. If we're in development, we're going to use the developer exception page, which is pretty normal. But there's an option here with some comments telling us that sometimes the identity model stuff might expose PII, and if we don't want that, well, by default, it's not going to show it. So it says PII is hiding, being hidden in log files by default because of GDPR concerns, data protection and privacy. So if you need it for debugging purpose to show you additional stuff, you need to turn show PII equals true. That's good to know. I don't think we're going to probably need it today. Okay, so that's the server. So if we run this, Control F5, hopefully it builds, and it says page not found. Okay, well, what did you do? In here, it's running on 44351. Does it have Swagger? I don't even think it has Swagger. Yeah, so the reason, would it have Swagger by default? I don't think it would. The reason we don't see anything here is because it has no home page. So it's really, it's really by design that we're not seeing anything in the browser because it's an API, right? We just talked about how it doesn't have any views, doesn't have any razor pages. You're only supposed to hit the endpoints on the API. But we know that the API has a get endpoint that we could probably hit with our browser. And that's going to be API/to-do list. And by default, it should just give us all those things. Now, it won't really because it's got an authorize on it. But we should at least get something other than there's nothing here. So we go to API whack to do list, and now we get a different problem, which we expect, which is that we get a 401. If we hit F12 and we look at the browser tools and hit this again, we can see a little more detail perhaps. If we go here, we hit the to-do list and we see some headers, and we can see that we are hitting API to-do list with a get. We got back a 401 response. And it's telling us www authenticate bearer here in the response. So it's saying, hey, I'm expecting a bearer token, and you didn't give me one. So that's going to tell us that maybe we need to figure out how to go get that bearer token. Okay, and from this perspective, we don't really know. It's not going to tell us any more than that, which is why we have this other client application. Well, let's look at one last thing in the service before we switch apps. So in the app here, that's right. It's all about tokens in this example. Tokens are your friend when it comes to securing your APIs. Okay, so in here, the last thing we want to look at is the app settings. So in the app settings, this is why I pulled up my sample from last week's stream. Get down there. There we go. Our instance for Azure AD is still going to be the same. It's login.microsoftonline.com. Our domain, we can specify the domain of our tenant. Last week it was just qualified.domain.name. It can really be anything that you want. So we'll just use the same one I did last week. I think that came from the sample. And then I need a client ID and a tenant ID. And I'll show you in my Azure portal where those are coming from. And they're in reverse order here, so I have to make sure I get them right. But this is the application ID in the Azure portal here. And so that's client ID that I was using. And then tenant ID is this. And so here's the tenant ID, right. Paste that in there. So now I should have the correct configuration when we do get this thing wired up and we start passing it tokens and it has to verify things. Okay, so now let's look at the client. And the client has a home controller that does allow anonymous. And it has this service called iToken acquisition and an error page, right? And is it using this? It's not actually using the service in here. But it also has this to-do list controller, which does need the to-do list service. And in here, there's different options for get and post and what have you. But this is an actual MVC application, so I'm going to expect that in here there are going to be forms and things for creating to-do lists and other such things, right? So if we run this one and we make this our startup project, we'll see if it works out of the box. I haven't configured it yet, so it's probably going to have some issues. But it at least should show us something, right? Okay, so unable to retrieve, IO exception, PII is hidden. That sounds similar to that thing we were seeing. Okay, so it won't show us that because I don't have that setting set. Okay, well now I know why I would want that setting. So in startup, in developer exception page, this other one told me how to do it, which was right here. It said Microsoft didn't want to logging. Set that to true. I don't know if I have to set that to true here or there. I don't know enough about what it's doing yet to say. So I probably shouldn't be messing with it until I have a better understanding. But for now, let's just try throwing it right here. See if that works. Because it is still using, yeah, it's using Microsoft Identity. So let's see what that does. We'll save that there. That's the worst that could happen. And we'll run it again. And now we get a different error. Hey, so it worked. Hold on. Can't you use the application's identity? Coming in from a user boom boom says application's identity so that you don't have to hold keys in the config. I don't have any keys in my config. I just have some IDs that specify which app I am. So there are no keys in config, just to clarify. But I do need to tell whatever third party I'm using for OAuth or OpenID. I need to have registered with them and said this application is going to come to you and it's going to ask you for permissions. And anytime you do that, you have to get some kind of an ID that third party can use to tell who you are. And so that's all I've done. And we haven't shown the Azure Portal. I think I still have open from last week here somewhere. Maybe not. But we'll show that in a minute, and you'll see where I'm getting those IDs from my AD organization in Azure. All right, so now let's look at what this thing says. So this is saying, can't retrieve a document from loginmicrosoft.com, blah, 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 because the tenant ID is still not configured. It literally says the message in there. So I need to just, first off, take what I just did in this app settings down here and say this client ID that's in my server, I need that in my client as well. So in app settings here, here's a client ID that it's going to want. So we're going to paste that in. What did I just do? I think I did the wrong thing. I'm expecting the next thing to be this. So I copied all that. Did I copy it right? Let's go try that again. That's what I want to. Oh, it's the extra quote at the end. That's what I didn't want. Okay, so there was that. And now we'll try this again without the quote at the end. Did not like that. Okay, then the tenant ID. You can use common for your tenant ID. We talked about this last week. That'll make it so that anyone that has any type of Microsoft account would be able to log in. And maybe I'll do that if I have time here today as well. But for this one, and I think maybe Boom Boom was talking about these keys, which I hadn't gotten to yet. Those might be something that we want to keep somewhere else. But for now, this is just a sample app. So to get it to work, we might need that client secret info. But anyway, common would let you have folks that would have any type of Azure AD Microsoft account access, or you use the GUID of your specific tenant ID, which is what we're doing. And I keep thinking I need to Alt-Tab, but it's not. It's right here. And I need that tenant ID 6 Foxtrot 7. Copy that. Go up to this other app settings here, and it should be right there. 6 Foxtrot 7. Domain, I'm going to make that the same as well. So let me grab. I probably could have just grabbed that whole section, right? Since I'm at the end of the day, it's probably going to look just like this. In here, last thing, right there. And then the only other thing this thing has added now is this sign out callback, OIDC, OpenID Connect. But otherwise, it's got the sign in as well. So sign in and sign out are added to the Azure AD in the client application. The server didn't have those. The server just had the instance and domain, tenant, and client. All right. Let's build that again, which will restart the app. And then let's Alt-Tab to the app. And now this is what we get. So it has redirected us to here. So let me close this down and stop the web server and just run it again so you can see that happen when we hit it. So we're running to-do list client. Control F5, and that's where we end up, right? So if I were quicker on the F12, we'd be able to see the redirect, and we can do that by hand because I know where it's going. So let's do that. So we'll hit F12. We're going to keep the list of all the requests that we made, and instead of going here, we're going to go to https:// 44321, which is where it's going. We'll hit that, and that's not right. HTTPS localhost : 44321. That's better. And it ends up there. So what we should see is a redirect. I'm pretty sure. And I accidentally kept all the search data. I didn't want that. Where is it? There it is. There's my localhost. All right, so I made localhost call. It gave me back a 302 temporary redirect. Location is this one. All right, so login Microsoft.com, blah, 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 authorized client ID, Foxtrot 93. Here's my redirect URI. Here's my sign-in. All the stuff that we had in configuration is now being passed into this, so it knows what to do after I log in. And now it says, the provided request must include a scope input parameter. The provided value for the input parameter scope is not valid. Scope OpenID profile offline access API enter client ID of to-do list service from the portal is not valid. Scope format is invalid. Scope must be a valid URI. All right, or a valid GUID. So example scope or GUID scope. Okay. I think I did not create a scope for this client last week, or if I did, I'm not specifying it here. So now the next step is for me to configure the server to work with this app, maybe. Let's see. In my client configuration here, here's my scope here, and it says API enter the client ID of your to-do list service -v2 from Azure Portal. To-do list service -v2. Do I have that? All right, let's go to the Azure Portal. Let's look around and see what's there. So I'm opening up on my other screen and make sure I can get to it to not expose anything I don't want to expose. and we'll go to, yeah, that's fine. I'll update my contact email, and then Azure AD is right here. And then there's my tenant ID. All right, so let's say that this is good. So I'll throw this up here. So here's what we see in the portal. And at one point a few years ago, I worked for the code project, and it got attached to my default subscription in Azure, and I don't know why, but that's been what it is ever since. But it's not actually the company's subscription. But anyway, in here I can manage tenants, and we have various tenants here. This my default is the code project with 6 Foxtrot 7. So that's fine. And we had, what did we do last week? I'm trying to remember. What did we do? We set something up with Azure AD, but I don't remember where it was. You go check the documentation from last week real quick. Under Expose API, thanks Christos, back to your client app, you'll need to configure a scope in the API app registration under Expose API app registration. Alright, cool. I remember exposing an API last week, but I don't remember where that was. Under app registration, which has got to be right in here, right? It's under manage, app registrations, app registrations, app registrations. Where is app registrations? You said go back to your client app. My client app is in Visual Studio, I think. Christos knows what he's doing. I'm just not following his instructions. Somebody tell me I'm blind and app registrations is here. Oh, there it is. Look at that. I am blind. Thank you. All right, so app registrations. Last week we created Azure AD Twitch stream and Azure AD API. This was the one we were trying to get to work with the stuff last week. Under Expose API, you need to configure a scope in the Azure app. All right, so I did that, I think, last week. So I have an application. It's this Azure AD Twitch application. And it has a scope. Where's the scope? There's application ID. I don't see the word scope on here anywhere. No. Expose an API. Did that. I'm here. Was it the endpoints that had the scope? No. Those are all the OAuth and OpenID endpoints. Okay, great. Left panel, expose an API. There. You guys are all telling me. There's my scope. Hey, I did that last time. All right, so what we're saying is if I copy this scope, and it says admins and users should be able to access it, and I'm already logged in, then that should do it. All right, and then there's my client ID, and copy that whole thing. Right? Yeah, copy that. Thank you. We're going to come over here. We're going to drop that right in here, and theoretically here, that would work. Right? Okay. So let's read this comment a little more closely and make sure that it tells me what I just did. So to-list scope is a scope of the web API you want to call. This can be that / however you want to use it. Scope for v2 is that / access as user. That's what I'm doing. Or a scope for a corresponding v1 application, which I don't have. Created in the Azure Portal. And the instructions for that would be something like go to app registration, and then say expose an API, and then you'll have a page that looks like this where you're on your app, expose an API, scopes defined by this API. Okay, I'm saying all that for myself and also just to make sure if you're trying to follow this you see what we just did. Okay, so that should, I think, get us past the issue, because I don't think I need this for any of the things I'm trying to do so far. So we'll run the app again, and we get here. Now it says the reply URL specified in the request does not match the reply URL configured in the application for this guy, and that's because the one I set up last week is not the one I'm working on this week. So that's my fault. That's not the Azure's fault. So my reply URL that I'm configuring in my app is in app settings, and I said, is it? I guess it's just it's going to be related to the port. So the port is 44321, I believe. To-do list base address. Do I need that? Is that the other thing I need? 44351. I wonder why it's 44351 when it's actually 44321 in the sample. Let's see if that matters. I'll just try that all by itself. Does that do it? No. So Foxtrot 93 still doesn't match. I know I set that up in Azure last week. So over here for this client application, it's not there. Copy that whole thing, not your scope. Okay, I did that. Where's the reply URL that this thing is looking for? Where's that configured? Because here now it says the reply URL specified in the request does not match a reply URL configured for the app. All right. So nothing so far is telling me to mess with the reply URL, and I forget where I set it last week. Check the authentication blade in the app registration and see what you find there. Okay, so in here, check out the authentication blade in the app registration. Here's my redirect URLs. Those are not necessarily reply URLs, but I think that's the same thing. Only for me, single tenant, I want access tokens. This is my front channel. It's 44321, I think. And maybe these need to be redirect. These will accept destinations with returning responses. Okay, so what? Let's see. Copy this into Notepad, and we'll be able to see what reply URL I'm passing it. You can find this in other ways too, but this is just what I'm looking for here. Is it's looking for localhost login OIDC 44321. So that's what I think it needs to have as a redirect. Localhost login OIDC 44321. So add this https://localhost 44321/login OIDC. And that was configured somewhere on the app as well, I think. Right? Not that. And save that. 44321 login underscore OIDC. Is that sign in underscore OIDC? Alright, that's why you have to copy paste these things. Sign in OIDC. Save. Alright, now refresh. Sorry, no. That's still not it. Okay. Looking at the chat, I don't see anyone throwing me a lifeline. So, okay, check the reply URLs is from that list and add new application request and use it. Reply URL you're currently sending in the request. Coming from someone at Microsoft from support. Reply URL is not a reply configured for the app. This is my app. These are my redirect URIs. This is hopefully where that goes. I'm not sure that's where it goes. It doesn't say reply URLs here. It says redirect URIs, but I think that's what it's telling me. I don't think I need these ones I was playing with last week anymore. So we'll get rid of those. That's Postman. Definitely saved. And let's shut these things down. Go back to the Visual Studio. Let's launch it again. Let's make sure I didn't forget anything here. To-do list base address is 44321. That said something different before. I'm not sure why. But let's just run it. And we're still same error. Okay. So in here, it's not telling me anything really new. We hit 44321 on HTTPS. We're in development. And then we are not authenticated, right, which is what we expect. Because we're not authenticated, we're going to redirect. And we're going to say OpenID Connect was challenged. And so when it did the challenge, it redirected me over to loginmicrosoftonline.com. where it said, hey, this reply URL is not what you want. All right. So in here, is there another URL? Is there something called a reply URL that I missed? Because there's definitely a ampersand redirect URI, blah, 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 blah. And then there's a response type, sign in dash instead of sign in underscore. Is that what I did? You're so smart. See, that's why I have extra eyes. Thank you. Let's try that. So we'll come back here. We'll try and actually do the right thing. In fact, now that I've got this thing on its own line, I didn't want to copy paste it because it's URL encoded. But let's just copy sign in dash OIDC because that's not URL encoded. And make sure we get that. There we go. Looks right. All right, save that. And I think a refresh might do it. No? All right. Let's shut it all down and try running it one more time. Ah, there. That's progress. New error. New errors are progress. Thank you, Solemn Orangutan. All right. MSAL service exception and configuration issues printing authentication. Check the error message. You can modify configuration in the app registration portal. Okay. What is the issue? Yeah. Okay. Here's what I'm getting in my stack trace, which is maybe a little better. And this is saying unhandled exception occurred while executing the request. Invalid client. Configuration is preventing authentication. Check the error message from the server. Modify the configuration. Invalid client secret is provided. Okay, so I probably do need to actually create that client secret and put that somewhere. So let's see. C aka MS MSAL net invalid client for details. All right, let's do that. Here's what that looks like. Invalid client. This error indicates the configuration has occurred. Request body must contain a client assertion or a client secret. You've not specifically enabled a public client application in the Azure Portal and are attempting to do an authentication flow is only available on public clients. Okay. In the app registration for your client, under the authentication blade, select yes to enable a public client. Otherwise, do stuff with certificates. So maybe we can enable public client. Does that go against what I'm trying to do? I don't know if it does. So under authentication, blade, look for enable public client, allow public client flows. That seems to be under yes. Enable the following mobile and desktop flows. It says yes. So maybe that's not the issue. All right. What else? I need to get that client secret, I think, because it's sitting there just glaring at me inside of the authentication there. Now, normally, if I weren't streaming this, I would be reading the docs and I would be reading the README file. And the reason I'm not is because I think that's incredibly boring for you to watch. So normally I would not just be, flailing about trying things, and hopefully you wouldn't be either. But let's go in here and see if the word client secret appears somewhere. And it does, right? And if we actually read the documentation in the README file, it would probably make our life easier because it would tell us what we need to do. Like up here where it says how to create the application and how to go into the redirect URIs and add the exact thing that I was just trying to do, all right? So yeah, maybe we should read the docs sometimes. So, all right, so we save the thing, and we're basically at this step now, it looks like. So in the app's registration screen, select certificates and secrets in the left, and we can generate that. All right, so I'm going to pull this out and keep it secret over here on this other page so it looks like I know what I'm doing going forward. And we'll jump back over here, and it says in the client secrets section, which must be this. Excuse me. All right, hopefully that was on mute. We have a client secret already with a secret ID. I wonder if that's what I want. All right, so in there, in the left, open a page where we can generate secrets and upload certificates. In the client secrets section, select new client secret. Okay, let's do that. Enter a description, for instance, app secret. Okay, that sounds very detailed. Select one of the available key durations. 6 months is fine. As per your security posture. You need to stand up more, have better security posture. Okay, the generated key value will be displayed when you select the add button. Well, I don't want it to be displayed to you people, so I'm going to put it down here for just a second, and we'll say add. And it is displayed. I see it. Now, it says, select one of the available key durations, generate key will be displayed, copy the generated value for use in the steps later. You'll need this key later in your code's configuration files, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so let me just pull up my notes here, and we'll say I have a secret value, which is copy that, paste it there, and have an ID of copy that, paste it there. Now I've got those for later. We can go back here. Stop showing it. I don't want it to show it. Yeah. So we'll bring this back up where you can see it. For some reason it wants to show it every time I go back to the secrets page now, so I just won't do that. Alright. This key value will not be displayed again. It is not retrievable by any other means, so make sure to note it before you navigate away to another blade. In the app registration screen, select the API permissions blade on the left. Open the page where we add access to the APIs your application needs. API permissions. Got it. Okay. Select the Add a Permission button, and then ensure the My APIs tab is selected. So I want Add a Permission for My APIs. My APIs tab. There we go. There's my API. In the list of APIs, select the API to-do list service, say Asp Net Core, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to use this Twitch one that I set up last time. And then in the delegated permissions here, select the access in the list. Use the search box if necessary. I think it's that one. Okay. Select that. Then select the Add Permissions button at the bottom. So select it there, Add Permission. Alright. This is much easier when you have good documentation, I will tell you. Alright, now configure the client app to use your app registration. So I think we're going back to Visual Studio here. And in Visual Studio, open it in your IDE, just did. In the steps below, client ID is the same as application ID or app ID. Open the app settings ID file, that's what I'm looking at. Find the domain and replace that, find the tenant and replace that, find the client ID and replace that, find the client secret, and replace the existing value with the key you saved during the creation of this thing. Right, so that's this. And I want that to be that secret. And I don't think I have an easy way to not show you that other than to move this to some other place. So we'll do that. Paste in my client secret. Find the key to-do list scope and replace the existing value with the scope. We did that. Find the key to-do list base address and replace the existing value with the base address of the service. By default it says it's 44351, but I really think it's 44321. I don't know why they have that, but I do want to make a note here, 44351, in case I need that later. If for some reason this doesn't work. Now run the sample. Okay, for Visual Studio users, here's my docs I'm looking at. Clean the solution, rebuild it, and run it. Alright, so we'll say build, clean. You might want to go into solution properties and set both projects as startup so you can run both of them. Yeah, that would be good. Or you can run it from the command line. So yeah, let's do solution properties. Let's see, we'll save the JSON file, we'll close the JSON file, we'll bring it back up where y'all can see it. My shared monitor is above, so when you see me looking up, that's because I'm looking at the shared screen. I think I can launch both of these. So we'll just say manage startup projects. The thing I can never get to work in Visual Studio though is to let them both start without debugging. Surly Dev, did the stream die? I hope not. I'm still here. Anybody else hopefully still seeing it? My bandwidth thinks that I'm still streaming, so there's that. Anyway, Surly Dev says hi. Okay. Over here, we are looking for, lost my train of thought, set startup projects. And in set startup projects, I want to have multiple, and I want them each to be start without debugging. And I don't know if maybe this works now in the new version of Visual Studio, because in the older version of Visual Studio, when I do this, it usually doesn't work. But now it works. It's amazing. But stuff is not working. Alright, so theoretically that worked. It didn't blow up. But we get a new exception. And a new exception says configuration issue is stopping you. Client is public, so neither client assertion should be presented. Alright. So maybe I don't want it to be public. Client is public. Invalid client. I think I misconfigured. I didn't follow the step-by-step instructions that were here. I used the ones I had from last week. And because of that, I think that we didn't set things up the way we should have. So up here, when we registered the client app, and we selected all these things, nothing in here said, hey, make that thing look public. And we just saw that mine was. So I think if I go back to my expose an API and API permissions, no, expose, where was it? Authentication, yeah. Allow public client flows. We're going to say no. I think, maybe that's what I want. And we'll go back to here, and we'll shut that down. We'll go back to the app itself, and we'll try running it again. And I didn't get the same error, I don't think. I got a 401 invalid. Oh, maybe it is the same error. Configuration issue, can modify, client is public. Alright, same thing. So what do I do when I have that? See invalid client for details. Okay, well, let's go see that. I'm sure I misconfigured something. I'm sure this is my fault. Invalid client. Error indicates configuration issue has occurred. That's what we saw already. Request body must contain this or that, right? Okay. And in the thing, you'll see this in the portal under the authentication blade. Select yes to enable a public client. But now it's saying I am a public client, and therefore I can't pass in the thing, right? Original exception, client is public, so neither client secret should be presented. Right, so what do I do about that? Copy that. What we do about it is we search for it online. And I was registering my app as a native app, and AAD app should have been registered as a web app. Okay, so like I said, I probably screwed it up last week when I set it up, and I'm trying to reuse the app, which is probably not going to work. So maybe I just nuke this whole thing. So here we go, authentication, that's there. API, expose an API. Where do I expose the app? I'm not comfortable enough with the links here to know which one I need to go to. Yeah, so here it says it's a single page, and somewhere I change that to be something else, right? I add a platform, and then that's where I say it's web. I think that's what it is. Yeah, there we go. So add a platform, make it web, and give it a redirect URI. So instead of the single page app with this redirect URI, I want it to be a web app with this redirect URI. Configure that, and it's not happy with that. Redirect URIs must have distinct values. Okay, fine. So we'll take it off of single page one. Cancel this. Take it off of this one. Go back to, in fact, we'll just nuke this single page one. We're not doing a single page one anymore. We're doing this web one. Enter the redirect URI. Enter the front channel one, which I think was sign out. But that's in configuration. So in here, in the app settings, which I can't show you because now it has secrets in it. So in the app settings, it had sign in and sign out callback OIDC, like that, which looks like that. We want to use access tokens, configure, and now it says redirect URIs must have distinct values. They do. I nuked the other one. Failed to update. Redirect URIs must have. I mean, we'll just say you get a. No, that'll probably break things. What could I put in here that won't change it? It's got to be this one, right? What if it had a capital C? There we go. Configure that. Now it's different. Ha. All right. Oh, this must be what it was seeing as the thing that was. No, because it let me do it there. Okay. Well, let's see if it's configured properly now. So we'll go back to Visual Studio here, and we're going to run this. We get out of the app settings and bring this up where you can see it, and out of that app settings as well, and run it. Let's try that again. Kill this, kill this, kill that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that's probably, I don't need that either. And I don't need that either. So, alright, all the way back to here. Now let's try running it. And it says some new error. Alright, so it launches both of them. One of them is the server, one of them is the client. That 4435 one, now I know what that is. Okay, I know what that is now. It was what it should have been, because it's talking about the server. So let's go fix that. It's like, why is that different? Alright, so 44351 is the server. I'm going to make a note there. That's the server location. Okay. And I mean, they're both servers, but it's the API server. Running it again, still getting errors. What's our error now? At some point, I'm just going to give up and start from scratch and follow the docs, because that'll probably be more likely to work. But this troubleshooting is fun. Okay, so now it says the client is public or neither of these things are presented. Error code invalid client. Client is public. It's a web client now, theoretically. When I change that, did that give me a new GUID, I wonder? Do I have to specify a different GUID for that? Up here, the web has redirect URIs. This app has implicit grants settings enabled. If you're using any of these URIs in a SPA with that, you should migrate the URLs. I'm not. There's docs for that, which maybe I want. Must be unique. Right, now it works. So it must have just been some fluke. Probably because I previously had a different one. Okay. Enabling personal accounts for existing if you need any. Okay, that's fine. Allow public is no. Everything is saved. And your error message is telling me that the client is public. So neither client secret should be presented. I'm passing in a client secret and it's saying it's public. Josuave83, hello, how's it going? Alright, so if I look at the instructions for this, in which everything was supposed to work, we said go create a key, select the thing, You'll need the key later. Then configure the client. Set up the permissions. I did all that. Add the permission. I did that. Go to app settings. Set all the things. Find the key for the client secret. Find that key. Find that key. Base address of the web API. Web API. Run it, explore it. Open your browser and go to 44321, sign in, and click on to-do list, and then start using it. Right? I haven't gotten to that point because this is still breaking. So somewhere in here, I set this stuff up wrong. So register your service app, to-do list. Let's just do this. Let's just start from scratch. So sign into your thing, Azure Portal, navigate to the Azure Portal, select the Azure AD service, select app registrations blade on the left. All right, we're just going to go through this whole process because I think I'm screwing this up because I'm trying to reuse one I started last week. So we'll go over here to app registrations, navigate to things, find app registrations and select new registration. Boom. Call it in the register applications that appears, enter your application's registration information and name, enter a meaningful application name that will display to users. For example, to-do list service Asp Net Core Web API. Sounds perfect. Let's use exactly the name that they're saying to use. Under supported account types, select accounts in the organizational directory only. That's what I want. That's good. Select register to create the application. Boom. Now I'm going to have to change those GUIDs, but we'll get to that. In the app registration, find a note application client ID. Use this value in your app's configuration files later. Yes, I need that. Copy it. So my client ID is right there. All right. So we're going to go through this quickly this time, and it's all just going to work. Select register, client ID, select save to save your changes. I don't have any changes. Select expose an API blade to the left to open the page where you can declare the parameters to expose this app as an API for which client application can obtain access tokens. There's a grammar error there. Maybe I'll submit a pull request. So expose an API, right? Got it. First thing you need to do is to declare a unique resource URI the clients will be using to obtain access tokens from this API. To declare a resource URI, follow the following steps. Select set next to application ID URI. Okay. Boom. For this sample, accept the proposed application ID URI by selecting save. Done. Alright, I have a feeling I'm going to need that somewhere, so I'll paste that into my notes. Application ID URI. Alright. Set for this, use that, select save. Okay, all APIs have to publish a minimum of one scope for the client to obtain an access token successfully. To publish a scope, follow the following steps. Select add a scope. Done. Enter the values as indicated below. For the scope name, use access as user. Alright. I remember doing this last week, and I definitely didn't know what I was doing there. Now select admins and users options for who can consent. Okay. Then for admin consent, display name, type this hard-coded string, access blah blah blah, like that. For admin consent description, put in this. These are all required fields. Alright, for consent display names, select access to the thing. Got it. And then for its description, say pretty much the same thing. This one is on your behalf as opposed to as the signed-in user. Okay, keep the state as enabled. Select the Add Scope button on the bottom to save this scope. Done. Next, configure the service app to use your app registration. Open the project in your Visual Studio IDE And in the steps below, client ID is the same as application ID or app ID. Go find your app settings.json file. Alright, so I've got that open below. Let me just drag the instructions up top so you see what I'm doing. We did all that, and now we're here. Figuring a service app. Open that. Set the domain and replace the existing value with your Azure AD tenant name. Now, I didn't do that before, but I don't know if that matters. But my tenant name is this, isn't it? Maybe? It's not telling me how to get the tenant name. I don't think it matters. But, you know, little things that may or may not matter are what are vexing me here trying to get this to work. So I probably ought to figure out what that tenant name is to use for the domain here. So what is my Azure AD tenant name? And how do I find that, they said. And the answer is log in, go to Active Directory. Once in there, click on domain names and copy the tenant ID under name. Domain names for your tenant. Alright, well, let's go back to the portal and let's open. Is there domain names here? No. Here? Maybe? Go to Azure AD. Go to domain names. Alright, here's what I'm looking at. And it says find the Azure Active Directory blade. It's not that one, is it? I guess I can search. No, I'm in Azure Active Directory. This is the Azure AD blade. Is it custom domain names? Maybe? Domain. Copy the tenant ID under name. Domain names. Wait for it. There it is. Alright, so yeah, that looks like something on Microsoft.com. Alright, that's what that looks like. So, copy that. And now in domain, I want to use that. So, okay, so in my application, in the server, in the settings, I'm going to set the domain to be that. I'm going to do it in the server, the API one. I'm going to also do the same thing in the client, which has a key that I can't show you. And then the other thing that changed is the tenant ID is your Azure AD tenant ID, which I don't think I've changed. But the client ID has, right? I have a new client ID, and that's the one that goes with this. And I noted that, and that's here. Alright, so my client ID is no longer Foxtrot93, it is now Charlie04 in both places. Whatever instructions you have now are way better than last week, yes, no doubt. And if I actually follow them, that helps. Okay, so we've done the service app. I jumped ahead a little bit. I did the client app, but I need to register it probably still. So select app registrations on the left. Right, so let's get back on track here. We'll come in here. Don't need this anymore. And my instructions said, move these down where I can see them. Select app registrations blade on the left. Select new registration for the client app. This is the to-do list client. I think what my problem was before is I only registered one of them, not both. So to-do list service is here. To-do list service is not the same as to-do list client. So I go here. I think I've been trying to use the same one for both, and that's been what's been throwing me. I go to app registrations again and do a new registration now for the client. Why do I need to register the service and the client? That's non-obvious to me. Go in here, to-do list client. Okay. New registration. In the registration, a name, enter a meaningful name, such as to-do list client, Asp Net Core Web API. Under supported account types, this organization only. That's right. In the redirect URI, now put in 44321. So this one is where 44321 goes. Redirect URI is that. Note there are more than one redirect URIs used in this sample. You'll need to add them from the Authentication tab later after the app has been created successfully. Alright, then select Register. In the app's registration screen, find and note the application client ID. You use this value in your app's configuration files later. Okay, so I think I need to know that this one is different than that one. I was thinking I only had one client ID, but I actually have a client ID for the API and a different client ID for, I guess, the to-do list client. Okay, which I've also probably just screwed up because I already pasted the other one in both places. So let's make sure we follow the instructions. In the registration screen, select Authentication in the menu. Boom. And if you don't have a platform added, select Add a Platform. And the web option, okay, that's there. And for redirect URIs, enter the following: localhost 44321 sign in dash. That's not there, is it? Alright, redirect URIs slash 44321 sign in dash OIDC. And that is unique, and that is a dash, and that all looks good. Right? Yeah. Register, sign in OIDC. In the front channel logout URL section, set it to the sign out OIDC, which is right here. Copy. Can I save that? I guess hopefully it'll save. Paste. Save. It's going to tell me it's not unique. Nope. That's good. Alright. Now select Save Now. In the app's registration screen, select Certificates and Secrets. Okay. I don't have any for this one because it's a new app. In the Client Secrets section, select New Client Secret. Boom. Select one of the available key durations. Give it a fancy name like App Secret. We did this once already for the other one, but now we're doing it right. And there's our key, which is fine, and I don't really care if you see it at this point because I'm going to change it. And we're going to take that secret. Generate key value, you'll need it later. Okay, so fine. Client secret value is that one. Okay, so select one, generate, you'll need it later. In the app's registration screen, select API permissions blade, which I did this previously for the other one, but not here. So now we're going to do the same steps we did before. We're going to say add a permission, make sure that my API is chosen, and this other one I don't want anymore. I want it to be the right one. My APIs, look for to-do list service ASP Net Core Web API. There we go. And in there, select the one in the list, add permission at the bottom. Do that, do that. Okay. Now configure the client app to use your app registration. So go into Visual Studio and find the domain and use your Azure AD tenant name. I did that already. Find the tenant ID and replace it with your Azure AD tenant ID, which I hope is the same one. Client ID and replace the existing value with the application ID of to-do list client. So to-do list client has an application ID of Foxtrot 7, maybe? This is to-do list client. Go to the overview. I did save this, right? So I go to the overview. It should tell me application ID is Foxtrot 7. Yes. So paste that in. That should work. Alright. Find the client secret and replace it. So there's that secret. And I'm in the wrong one. Man, I'm screwing things up. Alright. Put that back. Go to the correct one. Client ID, Foxtrot 7. Which I need to copy again. So many GUIDs. Client secret. Is it this YGI one? Done. And we're so close. Find the to-do list scope and replace it with the existing value with the scope. And the to-do list base address and replace that with the to-do list service of localhost 351. So I've got 351. To-do list scope. I don't think I have that. Where was I supposed to get that from? I have one, but I think it's the old one. To-do list scope, and replace the existing value with scope. What does that even mean? Alright, so my instructions on this one are a little bit weird. I would probably change this, like, with scope. Like, literally, I put the word scope in there. I'm pretty sure that's not right. I think it should be this API scope, right? I think it should look like this API scope here with access as whatever. But that's not what the instructions say. So let's see, where would I get that scope again? Wasn't secrets, I don't think. I think it was API permissions, wasn't it? Access as user. Expose an API. There's the scope. No scopes. Why are there no scopes? Why is this so hard? Alright, so configure the to-do list client Asp Net Api to use your app registration. Open the project, blah blah blah. Client ID, all these things are for clients. Find the key, to-do list scope, replace the existing value with scope. And then in my comments, which we read last time, the comments say scope of the web API you want to call. So this is the API. So this could be whatever, blah 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 blah. So this is the API one. Alright, so I need to go in Azure, not on the to-do list client, but on the API. So we'll go here, and instead of on the client, we'll go to the API. Where's the API? App registrations. I'm starting to find my way around here. There's to-do list service API, and it has a scope, and its scope is right there. And I think that's the same one, but maybe not. It is not. Alright, so this is good that we're going to make it the right scope. And then magically everything's going to work. Alright, so I think we're close. Run the sample. Alright, we're ready. Fingers crossed. Sign into your account. Hey, this is looking good actually. Alright, so this client ran, did not blow up. That's good. Turns out following instructions is beneficial. It's asking me for my permissions. It says to-do list client wants to know, can they view your profile and get access to data? And I will consent. I will accept. Whoa, we've made some progress. All right, so use this to summarize. Accept the cookies, and I can't see the top of this thing, but here's the identity, and here's the link to to-do list, which is really what I care about. Here's my to-do list. Here's what it's showing me. There's my email, and it's live.com, steve@kensmith.com. All right. And now I can play with this application. Let's look at what's happening on the network here. Now, the interesting thing is there's not going to be a whole lot happening on the network here because most of the work is happening somewhere else. But we'll just demonstrate that here. So when I say I want to finish this invoice report, we're going to delete that invoice report. I make a call to to-do list client, and then I fetch API. Really? I'm hitting the API from here? That's interesting. To fetch it, I thought the API would happen on the server side. But request header, do I have a bearer token in here somewhere? I just see the cookie. Okay, so I wouldn't expect there to be a token on here. Let's delete it and see if that works. It actually works. Awesome. So in to-do list client, localhost on a WebSocket, localhost 1300, we're hitting that, and then we're making a call to 44321, which is the web client again. So 44351 is the server, which we're not hitting at all. I'm sure somewhere in here I could pull off the token that it's using. I wonder if it's in a cookie. how's it holding on to it? It has an in-memory store it was using, but maybe on the very first time when it logged in, I had a chance to grab it. But what's happening is, if we debugged into this, the client web application, which is an MVC app, has gotten a token that is persisting. It's holding on to, and it's using that with each new request. So we go into to-do list controller, and it's got a client that it's using through this to-do list service to talk to the other API. So if we look at this service, you're going to see it's adding an HTTP client. It's going to configure that client somewhere to use the authentication, and probably that's being done. Well, let's see. It could be done and passed into this already configured, but it's also got token acquisition in here, so it must have something where it's figuring out what to do with the token. So here it's going to do this prepare authenticated client. Alright, so it's doing it here. So let's go and see what that's doing. So go to definition, and this is where it's going to get the token. So access token, token acquisition, access token for user async, etc., etc. Alright, now if we only look at the browser, we can't see this communication. I wonder if I can pick it up with Fiddler, though. Because maybe Fiddler will pick it up as the two things are communicating with one another. So let me go back into the browser page. That's not good. Browser page, there we go. And we'll just refresh this list. And I'm just curious what Fiddler shows me, which is not much. So what is that? Localhost, that's not what I want. Yeah, so none of this is showing me the communication happening between these two apps. That's too bad. Is there anything I have to do to listen more? I don't think so. Alright. So I can attach a debugger and we could see it there, and that's probably the best bet. So let's shut the app down for a second. And which one do we want to debug? I guess we'll debug the server. Yeah, let's debug the client. I don't want to try and debug them both at the same time necessarily, or do I? I guess I could. What if we go in here and we just say, can we launch them both as debug? I don't think you can. Set these up, and we're going to say start, and we're going to say start. Okay. Debug all the things. Alright, so when we get to-do list controller and we hit its default method here that's going to return this view, I want to see that. And when we hit this to-do list controller and it first populates the data, I want to see that. And that's about it, I guess. Home controller needs to be authorized. Is there something I can debug into in startup that's going to run? Not easily that I can hook into. Well, let's just see what happens when I hit F5. Is it going to work? There it goes, there it goes. Now we're in here. Now the first time I hit to do, let's see, I should probably sign out. Let's sign out, let's sign in. Redirect me back. You're still logging me out. In here you can see it called the sign out OIDC endpoint that we configured, so it knew to redirect to the right place after it did the sign out. You may still be signing out in some oh, you know what? We might still be signing out in some applications because where's my breakpoint? I must have hit a breakpoint. Stop. Right, let's try that again. F5. It wouldn't sign out because it was stopped at some breakpoint, I think. This time it didn't want to launch. Let's try it one more time. There we go. Alright, so it started that one. Now it wants me to log in. Is it redirected? There we go. I'm logged in. It redirects here. That's all good. This actually rendered correctly. I wonder why that was off. It was like the CSS was off before. That's weird. So now the sample is working, and this is also showing us what's going on. So our to-do list client here is running on 44321. That's this app right now. And it's going to acquire a token interactively. So it's going to go out to Microsoft Identity. It's going to prompt us and say, hey, do you trust this place? Do you want to let them share their information? Hey, Ed, thanks for the raid, man. So Ed Charbonneau has just raided me with 5 more viewers, so that's cool. We are working on Azure AD to secure our custom APIs, and we're looking through a sample and setting everything up in Azure. So that's what we're working on here at the moment. And so I'm just going through, I just got it all working, and we're just kind of checking out the sample app and seeing how it works. So now in here, after it gets a token, it's going to, the app itself on the server is going to talk to my API, which is a different app, and be able to interact with it. It's going to present the token when it does that. So to see that in action, we're going to go hit this to-do list, and we're going to hit a breakpoint here, and say, hey, go get this thing async. Now what I'm curious about is if I try and look at the immediate window, and I look at request dot headers, what do I have in request dot headers? Will it show me? There we go. And do I have there's my header cookie. That's good. I just said in my show I'm only building a UI for this app. Well, folks can go, here's the guy to show you the rest. Oh, you're just building, you're just building the front end of your, probably using Blazor, right, Ed? Alright, so here's the cookie that it set. Where's the authentication token? That's what I want to see. I want to see if it's got an authorize with a bearer token. I don't see the authorize header. Is it header authorize? Header authorization? I don't know. Let's just continue for now. So we'll jump into that later. So then it's here. Now we get into the to-do list controller, and it's going to populate the data, and we should see the data. Okay, so here's our data. So then the thing is, in our code, inside the API, we're still debugging, but let me see the Solution Explorer, and we want to be in the server. So in our server here, we've got this service here that they're calling to get the information, but actually no, it's the client that has the store of the token, right? So in here we said add an in-memory token cache, and so it's hanging on to that token, and it's passing that token every time it makes a call to the API. And so in its to-do list service, it goes and it gets the token from token acquisition, which is just that cache. So let's just put a breakpoint there and see what happens. So over here, let's say I want to refresh this list. We'll just hit refresh, and I don't need that breakpoint anymore. So let's continue. And here we're going to get the token. So now we'll step over, and I just want to see what this token looks like. So there's our access token. We'll look at it in a text visualizer. We can copy it all. And we looked at debugging tokens last week. Yep, see you, Ed. Thanks. Appreciate the raid. So Ed Charbonneau just raided. He's got a Blazor app with a booking system he was working on. Alright, so you can take this token now that we got this from Azure AD. It's a JWT token. There's various pages you can go to online to debug those. The one I usually use is jwt.io. JSON Web Tokens. It's got this debugger. You can come in here and you can copy all and paste in your token, and it'll give you a bunch of information about what is in there. So there's 3 parts to these tokens. There's a header, which is red here. There's the payload, which is sort of purpley, and then there's this light blue signature. And in a real thing where you're doing this in production, you would like this signature to always be verified and valid. When you're just doing stuff in dev and maybe you've got your own like stub token that you're creating, or you're doing something for integration tests or something like that, and you want to just create a token just so you can run your test. Sometimes you might create things that don't have a valid signature, but absolutely in production you want this to have a valid signature in order for it to be at all secure. What it means if that signature is not gets verified in that scenario is that somebody has probably manipulated the data inside that token, which means you can't trust it in any way. And you should just throw it away and ask the user to re-authenticate. Okay, so up here we've got the header, tells us what type of token it is, how it's encrypted, fingerprint, key ID. The interesting part is the payload, right? This is all the stuff that we got back from whatever we were using for authentication, right? If you're using a rolled your own solution, or using identity server, which maybe you've built out yourself, maybe you're using Auth0 or Okta or one of those other third-party services, or in our case, we're using Azure AD. And so when we're using Azure AD, it's giving us the information from there. So the tenant ID, this TID, that's 6 Foxtrot 7 that we configured. Our scope is access as user. That's being passed in from what we've configured in Azure once we finally figured out how to do that, because I didn't want to read the docs. But if you read the docs, it's actually pretty straightforward. The thing I was not getting earlier on this stream was the fact that I had to have 2 different clients. Right, that was the part that was stumbling for me, because the names of them both looked kind of the same at a glance. One was to-do list service dot whatever, and one was to-do list client dot whatever. And because the service and the client were like kind of buried inside that long string, I didn't notice it until a little bit later on in the stream. So apologies for that. Don't make that same mistake. Otherwise, in here you've got stuff like name, family name, given name, identity provider, IP address, name, etc. You could have additional stuff in here, whatever your identity provider is going to give you. These claims are what you're going to use to determine what permissions someone should have and whether or not they can do this or that activity. All right, so I just wanted to show what the OpenID stuff look like. We can close this. We can get rid of this breakpoint and continue. And get rid of this breakpoint and continue. And I don't think I have any more breakpoints. So here we are. So then we should be able to edit these. So we can say, let's add a new one first. So to do, well, now would be a good time for me to remind everybody, because it's been over an hour, that this is a sponsored show. So let's do this. Remind audience, this is an Azure show. We'll create that. Okay. So we're going to remind the audience of that. And so how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to pull up this slide, and we're going to say, hey, this stream is sponsored today by Microsoft Azure. Be sure to follow the code of conduct. Take a moment and check out 425show.dev to learn more about some of the great content they have there, and interviews and code walkthroughs and other things that they do there. So you should definitely check that out. And then I can go back to my app and I can say, you know what, I did that task, so we can edit it. Now it doesn't actually have a mark it as done feature in here. We'll just edit the name of it for now. Let's save that. Okay, so now we can see this was done and that's all working. And I guess then when we're done, so we can always view the details, and then we can delete it. And we have an option to change our mind. Right? We have a confirmation page here, and then we can say delete, and it's gone. And I imagine if I create another one, what ID will it get? Oh, it just gives me 3. All right, good. So it's because it's just using an in-memory list. It's not actually using like an identity table on a SQL server. The ID is just being set, I'm sure, to the next max ID instead of an identity column. Okay, so we have got it working. That's pretty exciting. So we now have the ability to create an API. Let me go and stop debugging. We'll review what we've done here. The client is interesting, but most of the time when I have clients for APIs, they're not going to be ASP.NET Core MVC apps. They're going to be a Blazor app, they're going to be an Angular app, a React app, some kind of SPA typically is the thing. So, but we've got our service working. In startup.cs, we only had to really add this one line of code here to sort this out and get it working. And then down here, we just had to do authentication and authorization. So that was pretty easy. The API is pretty straightforward. The only thing we had to do in this part of the API to take advantage of securing this with Microsoft AD was add authorize. So if you've used other authentication providers like Identity Server or other things, When you set up OIDC and other types of authentication for those types of apps, usually in startup, right here, you're going to have this wall of text that's just setting up all the different scopes and other things that you need to do um, with identity server. And I haven't used Auth0 and Okta or some of those other ones as much, but this is really painless. Like, this is literally as small as it can get. It's one line of code and it works. Whereas I know with identity server, it's usually a fair bit more configuration going on here. Now, that's just because they put all that stuff inside of this extension method, right? So I mean, all that stuff is still happening somewhere because they have to follow the standard for OpenID Connect for all that stuff to work. But they've done a good job of putting it behind this extension method to make it easy for you to set it up. And then the individual settings and things are just coming in from this configuration block. So the only thing that strikes me as a little bit odd here is that this configuration, they aren't setting anywhere in here what the section of that configuration is that they're looking for. So I think there's just a convention that you kind of have to use Azure AD as your key name here in order for that to work. I'm imagining that's the case. They probably have an option to pass in another choice if you want those. So let's examine that. So there are overloads to this. If I hit this, well, there's an optional configuration section name, and it defaults to Azure AD. So that's perfect, right? So it's not hard coded. It just has a good default, which is how you would want this to work. Same thing for the JWT bearer scheme and some of these other things. If you don't provide them, they default to logical defaults. So that makes sense. I like that. All right, so then that's it, right? The most of the work was done on the Azure side, setting it up, and that's sort of a one-time thing. Now, if you're doing this with a SPA, if you're doing this with Blazor or React or whatever, in Azure, you have to remember you have to set up the client as a separate thing from the server. So when we ended up here with our settings, right, they're both called client. That's a little bit confusing as well. Like, this client is the to-do list service client, and that's actually my API on 44351. And then this client here, to-do list client, instead of being C04, you'll see its app settings client ID is Foxtrot 7 Foxtrot. And then it specifies the server in this to-do list base address right here. So that's how they're linked to one another. And the scope is also related there. So, it says here I have this to-do list resource that I want to have access to. Here's its scope. I want to be able to access it as a user. So when you go and you authenticate and you tell Azure AD what it is you want to do, you have to tell it, I'm trying to access this resource, and here's how I'm trying to access it. Here's what it is I'm trying to do, and that's what the scope is giving you. And then one of the things that this does for you is when you get that token, the token has that scope in it, right? So when we looked at this token, which I've lost, it's over here. No, I think I might have closed that window. Why would I do such a thing? Anyway, when we looked at that token, you saw it had this scope in it. And what that means is that scope could be used by the API to specify what kind of rights they're allowed to have, what types of endpoints they're allowed to access. Maybe you have a scope that's read-only, right? And I could say, hey, I want this scope to be a read-only scope. And then inside of my API, I could have my post, my put, my delete, those things could all look at that scope and say, oh, it's a read-only 401, right? You don't have access to do this. And so, you don't have to check who the user is. By looking at the scope, you can constrain your authorization of what they're allowed to do based on that scope, which they got when they requested the token. Okay. We have a little bit more time. I don't know that I'm going to have the time to really get anything else really working, but let's take a quick look at some of the other samples that were in this solution, and maybe we'll spend a minute and review back where we found this sample. So if you do a quick Google search and you look for Azure samples, so Azure samples GitHub, let's say, you should come here. And on Azure samples GitHub, if you search for Active Directory, it was toward the top, but this thing changes very frequently. The one I was working with last week that didn't have a ton of documentation was this Active Directory.NET Native Asp Net Core. And what it was lacking was the client and any way to get the token. This one now is a different quick start, and it's Active Directory ASP.NET Core Web App OpenID Connect v2. And we had a much better time this time. In fact, the only reason that we were slow at all this week is because I was trying to reuse stuff I did last week, which was my mistake. But in here, if you're trying to secure your API, which is most of the time what I'm trying to do, is I want to have my own APIs that I'm exposing to my own clients that my company is making or my client's company is making. We come in here and you can see there's three different options. One's just for your org, one's for any org, and then there's B2C. So I want to have time to go through and show how to use Azure AD B2C on here and see what that looks like. I don't think I'm going to have time to do that today, but maybe I'll have a chance to do that here in the next few days and show you what that looks like. Because Azure AD B2C, this is business to consumer, is a different way of operating. It doesn't work the same as standard Azure AD, where you have an Active Directory that typically maps just to folks in your organization. So if you want to have folks on the internet that aren't part of your company, aren't part of your organization, to be able to authenticate and reference or use your web APIs, then Azure AD B2C would be what you would want to use. And so that's the last thing that I want to show. But unfortunately, I don't have time to do that today because we're down to the end of my time. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Does anybody have any questions before I go? Anybody in the chat have anything they want to do? I'm going to make a note of this because this will be in my next stream that I'm going to try and knock out. And we're going to follow the instructions this time, I think. So if we look in here at the README files, this one just has an image. Is there a better README file? There's an overview. Okay, so here we've got some pretty good workflow walkthrough detailed steps. Okay, so that's what we're going to go through next time. So look for that. All right. I'll leave with, we'll see if there's somebody to raid. But also, I want to remind everybody to go check out the 425show.dev one more time. So here's, I couldn't find the browser where I already had it open, but I can't use the browser very effectively anyway. But there we go. So now go check out 425show.dev when you have a chance, and I'll shut down my slideshow. Let's go out and see if there's anybody on Live Coders or VisualStudio.com or somebody else that we could raid real quick before we're out of here. Anybody know somebody on Twitch you want me to think about raiding? Looks like C# Fritz is on. That's always a good choice. So let's see, what's he working on? Looks like growing your career with Trevin Chow. Alright, that sounds interesting. Yeah, let's do that. So we're going to go out to my creator dashboard and raid C# Fritz. Alright, I hope you all have a great weekend. And if you're trying to learn how to get Azure AD and secure your web APIs, hopefully this was helpful for you. Look for one more stream from me if you like. I see SurlyDev is promoting White Panther. I don't know her. I'm gonna stick with us rating C# Fritz because I know he's got some good stuff going on. But I'll definitely check her out and maybe follow her for next time. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the thanks. Like I say, have a good weekend. I'll pop over into C# Fritz here in a second and say hi, and then we'll be done. Thanks.